Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. We are excited to have Synergis Tech and Assembly sponsor today's presentation, which is eligible for 1 CE credit from the ACI. At the conclusion of this webinar, you will be able to access a link that will take you to a quick survey. You will be able to download your certificate once you submit the survey. Before we begin today's webinar, I'd like to remind everyone that the MD Expo Tampa takes place next month, November 8th and 9th, at the Tampa Marriott Water Street in Tampa, Florida. This event is supported by the Florida Biomedical Society. Join us for 2 days of networking, continuing education, and vendor engagement in a slightly modified, safer environment. Visit mdexposhow.com for more information and to register for this event. Webinar Wednesday would like to thank our sponsors, Synergis Tech and Assembly. Synergis Tech is a cybersecurity consulting firm dedicated to serving the information assurance needs of the healthcare industry. Synergis Tech services include expert advice and guidance, unbiased assessments, and practical deliverables and reports. We also provide program development resources, remediation, and strategic staffing for various roles to help mature and manage security programs. To learn more on this company, visit synergistech.com. Assembly is a team with backgrounds on healthcare, security, machine learning, and analytics. The team has built and launched solutions for connected devices in healthcare in their previous roles. Assembly currently provides a medical device asset and cybersecurity management platform. Assembly solutions currently help providers understand all aspects of their inventory, discovers device relationships, does risk monitoring and mitigation, and finally, provides an ability to prioritize patching and mitigation, providing alternatives to patching where available. For more information, visit www.assembly.com. Our presenters today are Carrie Weissall, Director of Managed Security Services for Synergis Tech, Matt Domino, Medical Device Security Consultant for Synergis Tech, and Shankar Somsuadaram, CEO at Assembly.
All right, thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is presented to you by Synergis Tech and Assembly. And today's title of the webinar is Medical Device Security Managed Services. So a quick intro is Assembly is a leading IoT cybersecurity company, which is comprised of a team with backgrounds in healthcare security, machine learning, and analytics. Assembly has built and launched a solution for connected devices in healthcare. Assembly currently provides a medical device asset and cybersecurity management platform. Assembly's solution currently helps providers understand all aspects of their inventory, discovers device relationships, does risk monitoring and mitigation, and finally provides an opportunity and the ability to prioritize patching and mitigation, also providing alternatives to patching where and when available. Now, Synergis Tech is a top-ranked cybersecurity consulting firm dedicated to serving information assurance and needs of healthcare systems. Synergis Tech offers specialized services and solutions to help organizations achieve privacy, security, and compliance goals. Now, Synergis Tech Medical Device Security Program, or services, helps multiple stakeholders, including IT, security, and clinical engineering, understand the number and the type of medical devices connected to the network, those that contain EPHI, and the security vulnerabilities of these devices. Medical devices do not follow the same rules as other networked appliances or devices. Therefore, CTEC can help develop a security strategy around medical devices. They can help manage many devices connected to the network, and they can help remediate identified risks on these devices. So with that, let's get started. Today's presenters are Carrie Weissall. Carrie Weissall is the Director of Managed Security Services at Synergis Tech. Matt Domino. Matt Domino is a medical device security consultant at Synergis Tech. And Shankar, CEO and founder of Assembly. So today's agenda. So item 1 here, medical device security challenges. We're going to discuss what are the challenges. We know most of you are up against costs. There's issues with talent and knowledge and time and efforts. And some may even have a good grasp of what's happening and what's going on, but may not know exactly where to start. So we can help with this, and we'll highlight some of this. Item 2 is the common issues. Many of you may be held up by some common issues we often see. These can be due to strategy, leadership, resources, time, money, and level of effort. Difficulties with policies and procedures and vendors in the organization itself, and even the risk appetite of the organization are some of the common issues we tend to see. And then item number 3, why? Why medical device security services? And this is because we can help with the common issues that were just discussed, right? We have a partnership between Assembly and Synergistech where we can be that single pane of glass for you and your organization to help alleviate some of these common issues. And then item number 4, medical device security services. What is it? What does it look like? What does it consist of? We're going to highlight and cover some of this. So item 5, benefits of managed security services. So how can Synergistech and Assembly and their partnership help you and your organization with your medical device security efforts? So we'll highlight that today in today's presentation. So with that, we'll cover and run right into medical device security challenges. With that, you'll see here this nice infographic that's really going to depict most of this. So the first and foremost is culture. And culture is really hard to wrap your head around sometimes because there's a big communication gap between CE and IT and even IS. There's numerous different departments, there's different stakeholders, there's different components to leadership that make it really challenging to bring these groups together. And there's a lot of limited training and knowledge, right? So there's a lot of training and certifications that might be in the realm of security, and there's certifications and training around biomed or CE, and there's also those with IT. But there's nothing very, very specific to medical device security. So it becomes very challenged to have a good understanding of all aspects of this. The next item here is the legacy systems. We are all familiar with this. We have so many devices that have different levels and different revisions of software and operating systems that it makes it a complete challenge. Devices that might have Windows 95, 98, 2000, Windows XP, and now even Windows 7 with being end of life. The other challenge is the longer life expectancy. These are multi-million-dollar assets, and heck, some of these assets could be just a few $1,000s as well. We often find different organizations who might acquire different physicians who bring in their old stuff and need and want to continue to use their old stuff. That again, that's legacy or it's one-off or one of a kind, and it makes it again incredibly challenging to secure these devices. So again, we have these assets that are floating around and we'll hold on to them as long as we can. We'll try to continue to repurpose them because there might not be adequate funding. There's not a lot of visibility on these to where we can really showcase a need to replace. And then the next one here is unable to update. Medical devices really can be rarely patched. When they can be, it's a huge challenge. It's an undertaking, right? So we find that most devices just don't have patches available. They're, again, because the operating systems might be legacy, the OEM or the vendor stopped supporting them. So they just stopped providing those kinds of updates. The ones that are available for updates tend to be backlogged by maybe up to 3 months. So at the point where you finally get an approved patch or an approved update, you're already out of date. So it's a tremendous challenge. And then the medical device ecosystem is incredibly complex. You have numerous different vendors. You have numerous different device types and different software platforms and different revisions and different levels of firmware. So you might have 500 patient monitors that are all the same make and model, but they can have different levels of firmware and revisions that make it really complex. It makes it a big challenge because these different firmware levels and revisions might have different open ports. They might have different vulnerabilities. They're not all affected by the same types of vulnerabilities or the same types of threats, which turns it into a complete challenge. And then device managed across a maze of ownership and support. So numerous organizations behave and operate differently with, again, the different levels of leadership, the different groups. So between CE and IT and biomed, there might even be these middle ground or middleware people or groups that manage some of these devices or their networks, which again becomes very complex because maybe within the CE department, once it hits the wall, once you plug into a port, you're done. You stop there. So you can't finish or follow through, which becomes, again, a huge challenge. And then here in the top middle is the lack of security controls. So standard IT security controls typically don't apply. So the controls that might be applicable or available to a normal desktop or a normal laptop type environment, they just don't apply to medical devices. In some cases they do, and when they do, it can be a real challenge on understanding how and where and why and what to do with those kinds of controls. We also have these administrative controls, and the administrative controls can really start to impede clinical care. And what I mean by this is like those lockout features, the ability to authorize or authenticate individuals to log into systems, right? So when you start to implement these kinds of controls, your clinical users tend to become frustrated. You've added another layer on top of their workload where, they just want to do what they need to do, and if they've got to be able to log into systems repeatedly and have to log off when they're done, it's a challenge for them, and they often don't want to do that. And so we have to come up with a common consensus here of how can we manage that in an environment where we need to ensure we don't impede any clinical flow. Now, physical controls are often difficult to manage, right? So we have numerous devices that are mobile, they're floating around, they have lock and key, but they're just hard. We can't always ensure that these things are not in the hallway. We can't always ensure that they're not parked over here unless we have a program in place, unless you know that these assets are floating around and we can kind of ask those different clinical leaders, hey, can we move this device? Can we park this somewhere else? This is in an area where it's very common to patients and visitors and maybe staff members that shouldn't have access to these kinds of devices. So those physical controls, again, are difficult to manage. They're difficult to acknowledge, and they're just overall a challenge. And then lack of tools. Limited tools and lack of knowledge of what tools that can help inventory connected medical devices. So we're not familiar with where our devices are oftentimes. Again, they're mobile, we know that. So we don't know what they're doing. We don't know who they're talking to. We don't really know how chattery they are. They constantly are talking on the network. They're constantly doing things. They're constantly sending data to and from different services, different other hosts, and maybe even other assets. So we don't really know what that stream looks like. We just don't have our eyes or have some tools to help us with that. And we can't actively scan medical devices. So back to maybe like the IT or IS portion, where they have tools that really can scan the network and it can kind of visualize what desktops and what laptops are where and are they up to date and those kinds of things. We just can't necessarily do that with medical devices with standard IT tools. And then we have medical devices that are certainly proprietary. They're highly specialized. They're designed and manufactured for a very specific purpose. We know that they have these automated microprocessor tasks. They're driven by these microprocessors to do one specific function or one specific task. So they're highly specialized. They're not designed to surf the internet or go do this or that. They're designed to provide that clinical care or that diagnostic element that they were manufactured for. And we also know that they store and collect massive amounts of sensitive information. I think a lot of us tend to forget or tend to not see that some of these devices are holding many hundreds of patient records, whether it be images or just plain data. They just hold on to it forever, and we expect or assume our clinical users are removing this or doing something with it, when in fact, most of the time they're not. So it's kind of our job to start to look at that, start to evaluate and understand what devices carry and how much they're carrying and transmitting and how much are they transmitting. So we know if at some point if there's a breach or if something happens, we have an understanding of how much data there might actually be there. And then technical and operational dependencies. They have proprietary networks. They have proprietary protocols. They have proprietary ways of communicating with themselves or with other like devices. Wireless requirements can be a challenge as well, whether they need their own specific SSID or, the way their encryption is or their authentication methods to wireless networks. And even computer hardware can be proprietary or very specific or very unique, right? We know there's numerous manufacturers that have bought small-time companies to make very specific, unique components and devices and computers to embed inside their machines. And so we tend to not always know that they're there. We tend to not be able to work on them. We tend not to be able to have the details and data of those pieces of hardware that are inside of our medical devices. So it's a true challenge. And then insufficient visibility. this kind of rolls back into our lack of tools, where we don't really know what our connected inventory is. Many of us several years ago, we all have our CMMSs, and we try to capture all the fields that we can. And we probably have some spreadsheets somewhere where we try to capture, the different operating systems and things that we can, or at least try to highlight what devices are networked. And for many of us, that's been going on for years. And we don't really know what's accurate anymore, what's not. A lot of our technicians are focused on doing preventative maintenance. They're focused on doing their repairs. So the ability to really capture some of this information is difficult. It doesn't exist. Other than turning the machine on and looking at what information is there, it's just not capturable. It's not something that we've had the opportunity to get. Securing medical devices. Why is it hard? The issue is security may conflict with patient care delivery, right? We've just kind of highlighted this a moment ago. We want our patients to be given the best quality care they can. We want our clinicians to not be impeded by that. So ease of access and time and usability is truly a factor, right? We start to turn things on, we start to lock things down, and then all of a sudden it impedes their ability to do the things that they need to do. And so we need to come to a general consensus of what's applicable and what's not, as there are alternatives. And this is where it takes a high-level skill set, or a group of individuals to come to a general consensus of how to deal with that. And then we have difficult decision making within an organization. There's different strategies. There's different levels of leadership. There's different layers of leadership. There's different opportunities, right? And there's also that what we call risk appetite. So how and where do we want to proceed? What is our goal? How do we get to that? What does our roadmap look like? And when you have so many within your organization, or you have so many teams that are going to participate in this, it becomes a challenge to come to a decision. And then we have disparate technical abilities and system platforms. So the ability to understand, the ability to have the same, it becomes very challenging. There's too many differences. There's too many subtle firmware revisions. And then again, you might buy, a lot of us are starting to buy from third parties. We're buying used or refurbished, and we don't know what we're getting. Sometimes they inquire, what do you need? And we tend to offer that. But at the same time, it's not streamlined. It's not linear. It's not like we have all the same, and we don't have that visibility. We really tend not to know. Now, some of us have the opportunity to maybe, go to a central station or go to those areas that might be able to provide some of that, but that's time consuming. That's difficult. And maybe only one specific person knows how to do that who's been trained on that system. And then we look at conservative decision making. So again, we're patient safety focused. When it comes to an IS or IT perspective, and it comes to trying to implement controls or compensating controls, sometimes there's a real big lack of understanding of, if I turn something off or if I turn something on, what does that do to clinical care? What does that do to the device? Sometimes these individuals don't really know, and because there's that lack of collaboration or that holistic approach to security, they don't engage with CE. And so, CE probably has that knowledge of, that's not really going to impact anything. And so we've got to come together and have those conversations. And really, this is where, your governance committees and charters will come into play, and where Biomed or CE really needs to have a seat at the table, where we can help with some of these decision-making processes. We can provide that information to these individuals. So when we're talking about maybe integrations, and we're talking about network access control, and we're talking about these cool, fun tools that IT or IS may have, and how can medical devices be part of that, the CE community has to be part of that. They have to be in those conversations. And then limited education and understanding of device security capabilities, right? So we, as CE individuals, we signed up to be CEs because that's what we wanted to be. We wanted to turn wrenches. We wanted to work with medical devices. We had a strong interest in that. We wanted to be a part of that with patient care. So we don't necessarily have the education and understanding of what IT and IS do, because that's not our realm. That's not where we've been. That's not what we studied for. So that's a true challenge. And, there's education starting to spur up around that to help. And vice versa. IS and IT, they don't really care about medical devices. They often have different backgrounds and come from different fields. And so when they come into the medical or clinical environment, it's a challenge for them to understand how the devices behave and interact with clinicians when they tend not to physically even see these devices and what's happening. Where we all know CE is kind of the face. We see these, we put our hands on almost everything. And also then limited CE view into network operations. So it kind of boils down to everything we've been discussing, right? We have these devices, we know they exist, we know they're on the network, but we don't have those attributes. We don't have the tools. We don't know what tools are available. And so with today's presentation and webinar, we will discuss a tool that provides this kind of information, and Carrie and Shankar will highlight a lot of that. But for the most part, the tools that do exist, the tools they may already have, don't do a good job at all with medical devices. They may be able to provide some of the basic low-level attributes like a MAC address or an IP address, but that's not good enough for us. It's not good enough to have a complete, accurate inventory of our connected medical devices. And then underinvested in cybersecurity. That's a challenge, right? So most information security budgets are only about 10 to maybe 15% of the overall information budget, right? Or IT budget. So it's just a small subset of that. So to try and roll medical devices into that, or to try and have CE budget for cybersecurity for medical devices, it's usually a small budget. So it's a challenge. It's just underinvested. And it's going to take some time to get there. It's going to some use cases and to prove the ROI of some of the tools that are available for cybersecurity and medical devices. And lack of leadership. There are numerous organizations that may not have the chief information security officers. They may not have those CISOs that are available that have that strategic direction to say, hey, we need to do something with our medical devices. They don't exist at every facility or every healthcare organization. So that leadership and that strategic direction or vision doesn't always exist. And there's maybe some finger pointing of who's going to manage this, who's going to take care of it, who's responsible for it. And we just kind of get lost in this circle, this whirlwind of not being able to complete any basic tasks because of that lack of leadership. Common issues that we see and that you may have come across or may come across at some point are here. So the first is business. And it kind of rolls into what we just had a conversation on is funding, budget. What does the money look like? How do we budget for this? Where is that money going to come from? And how do we get that? How do we obtain that? Is that capital? Is that operations? What does that look like? So funding is a challenge in itself. Appropriate staffing. Goodness, how many FTEs do I need? Can my current group, can my current roles perform these operations and functions? Do we need someone or a group of someones to help with this? And then even with training. So, looking at it as, well, I'm going to do it internally. I'm going to work with my team and we're going to make it from a holistic approach. And so we're going to need some training, right? So coming across that training, finding the right training, the appropriate training is a challenge. And again, your organizational structure. Who does CE report to? Who does IT or IS report to? What do all these different groups look like? And again, what is that strategic vision? What is the risk appetite of the organization to how much do they want to tackle when it comes to medical device security? And then policies and procedures. We lack them. We see it all the time. So many different organizations have these siloed groups, and they have administrative policies, and then they have the different departmental policies. And usually CE or biomed doesn't have the policies necessary, and vice versa. IT and IS have policies, but they don't include medical devices. So you have to kind of take the two and try to mend them together at some point to see where they apply and to see if we can create one holistic policy for all these groups. If we can't, we still need to get some policies around within CE for what we're going to do with our medical device security, right? Are we going to create some secure baselines? Are we going to do risk assessments? Or what are we going to do? And we have to have some policies and procedures around that. Governance and sponsorship kind of rolling together, right? So governance is the ability to have a strategic direction, someone to have that vision and help make decisions. So you have to get your communities of interest, your different stakeholders from the different departments together and have some sponsorship from each one of those stakeholders or each one of those groups, and be able to come to a general consensus, be able to come to asking questions, identify problems, and solve these problems. And we just see that lacking in so many different organizations where they tend to not have that. So, biomed's going to go tackle, or CE is going to go tackle medical device security, but they didn't seek the input or the help or assistance from the other groups, which I can tell you right away, you're not going to be very successful because they control all the other attributes. They control everything obviously behind the wall or in the wall. And it's difficult. You can't really manage that without their assistance, and vice versa. If they want to do it, they need you. They need CE to be able to assist. They need CE to put their hands on the device, to turn it on, to look at this. Hey, how do I turn this off? Or how do I do this? So we have to have that to create a holistic approach to this. And then technical issues, right? Network awareness. I mean, I've covered this numerous times in the last couple slides, is understanding what's on the network. One of the first, foundational elements is having the attributes, understanding how many assets do you actually have connected. I can guarantee you, you don't truly know without a tool like Assembly. You don't really know how many connected medical devices you have. You might think you do, and you might be pretty close, but you're going to have a challenge. You're going to find these onesie twosies or these one-offs that are floating around somewhere, or these items that you forgot about that you plugged in for Dr. Smith 4 years ago and you just totally forgot they were there and hiding. So that's part of it. And then monitoring. Even what we do have, even when we do, let's just say your inventory is accurate and you know what's connected. Are you really looking at those on a regular basis? Are you monitoring those? Do you have that stuff operationalized into your preventative maintenance and in other forms? Probably not. So you probably don't have your eyes on it on a regular basis. And as mentioned, extensive use of legacy systems. We are all guilty of this. We have to. These assets cost way too much money to just replace on a continuous basis. So we have to look at it from a life cycle approach, and we have to be able to identify these legacy systems, and we have to find that if we have controls or if we don't have controls that can help remediate the risks, then what's our next step? Do we have compensating controls? Do we have these other possible items that can help with our strategy of medical device risk remediation? And if we don't, then we really, really have to weigh in a factor of removing or getting rid of some of these legacy systems. Vendors. I think so many of us overlook this, but vendors are a big problem. They're a key component to breaches. So not understanding what vendors have access to your network is critical. You need to know who's accessing what and how often. Even having the ability to audit, right? Knowing when your vendor is accessing a system and why. And then if your vendor leaves or maybe you switch vendors, making sure you cut that access off. And again, this might not be a CE function by any means, but I know as well as all of you know that we have numerous vendors that, especially with imaging devices or other really like robots and things like that, constantly have some sort of remote access. Are we monitoring that? Have we asked about that? Are you asking the right questions? So that makes some of these systems insecure, right? When vendors do have access, what kind of access do they have? Can they scan the network? Can they see what other devices are out there? And if you have a vendor who's insecurely accessing a system and they already have some vulnerabilities on their system, they open you up. And so that's a key element of one of those things that we have to look at when we start assessing vendors and assessing their risk and assessing the devices and their access. And then physical security. We really need to look at who's coming into our facilities, where are they going, what do they have access to, and where are we parking our stuff, right? We know we put our C-arms in certain areas, we put our mobile x-rays in certain areas. Are they viewable and visible to normal routine people like patients or visitors? Can someone just walk in and access one of these devices? Because I know most of you probably haven't changed passwords. You probably don't have any kind of a lockout timeout function or feature. And it's as simple as touching the screen and now you have access to the system. So we really need to be concerned. We really need to start looking at these and getting with those stakeholders and asking, go to the radiology director and say, hey, where we park this mobile x-ray system isn't really appropriate. It can be accessed by visitors and staff. Can we either employ some sort of controls, like making that lockout function or only having certain individuals authenticate to the system every time they need to use it? Or can we just park it in a room that has a locked door? So we have to provide these options to these different stakeholders as well. So why medical device security services? So why do you want to have maybe a managed service? Why do you want to have someone like Synergistic and Assembly partner with you to help with your medical device security concerns? For one is we can help with the cost of operations or cost control, right? We're that single pane of glass, or we can offer you that one-stop shop, a single price, and we can provide you with a scope or statement of work of all these different things that we can do for you and your organization. So rather than you try to scramble to try and complete certain tasks, we can do it on your behalf. We can work with you, and then we can teach you and learn and help you operationalize some of the things that we do. So when the engagement is complete, you can continue on with those operations. Improved risk management. We will certainly help you highlight some of those critical assets. So when you utilize tools like Assembly and utilize services with Synergistic, we can help you improve, again, your overall risk management. So we will help you kind of identify your most risky assets and your high risk and your moderate or medium risk. And then we can kind of help you remediate those. We can help you get to a level where your appetite really resides. So if you want everything to be in that medium category, we can kind of provide you that strategy, policies, procedures, those kinds of pieces of information to get you to where you really want to be. Higher availability, efficiency, and productivity, right? Time is money. So with a service like us and ours and our partnership with Assembly, we know what you need, we can see what you have, and we can help guide you, right? Keep your biomeds or your CE group running the CE components. Keep them doing what they need to do. We know you're limited on resource and maybe even training or education. So we can provide a lot of this information to you. We can help with your efforts, and you can continue to run your biomed shop. You don't have to worry about, well, do I need an FTE? How do I figure this out? As long as you have some individuals who are willing to work with us, we can provide a lot of these services for you. And skills required for managing operations, again, are specialized. If you have some dedicated individuals who really want to know more about this and are heavily vested in education and training and have a good background, absolutely. But again, oftentimes it's specialized. So having like a company like Synergistech, we have a well-diverse group of individuals who have different backgrounds in all the different modalities that are specialized. And then the resource pool, again, are limited, right? So even if you do determine you need an FTE or you need a group of FTEs or you need a whole team, where do you pick from? Where do you find these individuals? What are you asking for exactly? Having a partnership or allowing a managed service partnership can really help with that, those necessary resources to at least kick off and jumpstart your program until you obtain those resources that you need or want. So with that, I'll bounce it over to Carrie Weissall, and she'll discuss medical device security managed services in further detail.
So now you've talked about why do you need a medical security managed program, but let's talk about what do you need to do to start one out. And just like any basic security program, you're going to look at your IDPR. And I'm sure most of you are used to that acronym by now, but for medical devices, it takes a little bit different swing. And identify is typically inventory, but it's a little different when it comes to medical devices. You can't just run a rapid 7 scan and get your information from your inventory for your medical devices. Most of the time, you're excluding those devices out of your inventory because you did accidentally run it, and after the screening, you had to make sure you excluded all those IP addresses. So you need to make sure that you have a tool that can get you an accurate inventory of your connected medical devices. Once you know what that inventory is, you're going to kind of treat these mostly like you would any other security issue. You're going to look at what is your vulnerability management. Where do you have the vulnerabilities? Now, just like typical IT devices, they are going to have operating system vulnerabilities, but they're also going to have some specific vulnerabilities based on manufacturer, based on the accepted security practices for those devices. So you need something that's going to go out and proactively start looking for those. You also want something that knows what those security limitations are on top of that. The other piece that you're going to want to be able to do is once you've taken a look at what those vulnerabilities are, you've made sure that you know you're only looking at your medical devices and what's specific to that medical device is, how are you going to score it? What is the risk assessment that you're going to do? In a typical security assessment, we would have a questionnaire that we would go through. You know what you're looking for. They're the known standards. They're the known vulnerabilities. It's a lot different with a medical device. So you need something that's going to help you get to a granular recommendation on how you're going to mitigate that risk. The last piece that you want to talk about and detect is intrusion detection. So how does this device behave every day? We apply behavioral analytics to most of our IT workstations. It's rare to be able to do that to a medical device. So you want to make sure that you get a tool that's going to allow you to take a look at how did that device act today? Was it online for 2 hours every day for the last month, and now today it's online for 6 hours? What is it doing? How do we detect that? How do we say that that's an anomaly? And then how do you alert someone? What's the highlight when that device isn't behaving as it's expected? Normally, you'd be getting that data into a SOC SIM because you're already monitoring your perimeter. These devices are a little different. So you're going to need to make sure that where you're capturing that information is then able to pass that back up to all of your other monitoring systems. Make sure that you're looking at a tool that can do that for you. The last piece is, how do you protect it? What are you going to do to make sure that that device is secure? Can you block ports? Can you segment devices? And typically when you think about medical devices, you don't think about blocking a port. Everyone panics. Oh my gosh, you're going to turn it off in the middle of a patient procedure. But you know what? Truly, there are devices that you could safely turn off in the middle of a procedure. There are lots of devices that have local short-term storage. Get a tool that helps you understand what those are. If you knew at the other end of that IP address that's freaking out on your SOC monitor is an ultrasound that has 4 hours of local storage, turn the port off right now. Then you've got time to go figure out why it's doing what it's doing, just like you would treat any other normal workstation. So being able to pull these into more and more of the standard security practices, that's really what you need to do. Then, of course, we never have a conversation around medical devices without talking about segmentation. It's just the way it is. There's not a lot of proactive behavior that you can do over and above segmenting. Patching, yes, Matt talked about that earlier, but patching is few and far between. So segmentation is the fact of life when it comes to medical devices. Respond is a little different when you talk about medical devices. In our normal security platform, Respond is full out forensic analysis. You're bringing that hard drive back. You're either researching it or you've got a contract with someone to do the research, to do the forensics on it. What you're really looking at in this case is what are the forensics you can do with the data that you captured. You're not likely going to go take a device off the floor and research it forensically. You're not going to take that hard drive out. You're not going to be able to send that hard drive somewhere. What can you do with the data that you have here to find out what you need? So if you're working with a tool that gets enough data for you so that you can see, here's how this device communicated 3 days ago. Here's when it started communicating differently. Here's where it started communicating to. It'll help you get to the root of the problem. It's still forensics, it's just a different way to think about it because it's a medical device. It's not your typical forensic platform. So when you're talking about a tool that can gather all of this, the first tool that comes to mind, of course, is Assimile. They have done a lot of work in that space, especially around identifying and helping detect. Where we work a lot with them is how to make sure that all of that information about that device is in one spot. They bring all of the manufacturer information in and then use it to help you get a plan to work. So once you've got all that data and you're taking a look at, and it's a lot of data. So the first time you look at any medical device tool, you're going to be totally wowed by how much data is out there because they're specialized in it. But once you've got all of that in place, now what are you going to do with it? You need a program that's going to take all of this technical information that you're capturing and then make it into a long-term plan. What is it that you want to do with all this data? Well, the first thing you want to do is use it to manage your procurement process. You're doing all this work to clean up the devices that you have today. You don't want to bring in more devices that are going to bring in more risk to your association. Or you want to know, if I have this device and I'm going to bring in this one, which one is going to be less risk to my organization? So being able to use that data in your procurement process is amazing. You also want to make sure that in your procurement process, you are managing the devices as they come on board. What is your base configuration? And then use the tool to monitor what your base configuration is. If you've set that up, you can say, here's my base configuration for every infusion pump. If a device comes on the network that's outside of that configuration, you can know immediately if you've got the tool set up properly, versus getting the phone call from the doctor screaming because he went to the conference and he brought back a new toy and it doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work because you tried to put it on the network without having your base set up on there. And then look at what your installation and inventory management processes are. There's going to be a gap analysis. When you put this tool on, you're going to see at least a 10% difference in how many devices you thought were connected versus how many devices are actually connected. We've seen it every time we've worked with this tool. So what is that gap and how do you address it? You probably have some of the base information in your CMS system, but you're probably missing all of that connection information. What's the IP? What's the MAC? Where's it at? What switch is it talking to? So figuring out what your gap is and then get that data in there. Then your continuous support and maintenance. There's a tool sitting there. Somebody has to monitor it. How many times have you purchased a tool and then thought, great, now I have to have a body to sit there and manage it? So Synergistic brings that skill set to you. We know how to set up the tool. We know how to get it set up for the alerts so that you're monitoring it. And you're only seeing the alerts that you actually need to take action on. So that is a big piece of that puzzle. And it's part of the resource planning that Matt talked about. Education and training. So Synergistic brings a lot of biomedical and security training to the table. So as we're going through this process with you and understanding what it is you're trying to put together, policy, procedure, everything that has to do with building a program, we can help you educate your users on that. We also have the ability to educate the users just on flat out cybersecurity with the medical devices, which most sites don't have, and it's something that we all need to do a little bit more. Incident response management. So you've done all this work, you've got the tool, you've started your program. Here's where that benefit really starts to pay off in the day-to-day life of network security. You have an incident response plan, but does your incident response plan today call out medical devices? Is there one little line in there that says, call biomed? That's probably what it has, because that's about 90% of us what it has. But you really need to be able to build an incident response plan specific to medical device and then merge it into your IT incident response plan so that you're not jumping all over the place. You get much quicker response time and you are focused on what you need to do. And again, knowing if you can turn that port off immediately. It's a big, big value add there. Vulnerability analysis, we all do it all day long. We do it for all of our workstations. This tool is going to allow you to treat the medical devices just like another workstation. It's data that you have, it's data that you need to process, it's data that you need to store. And then lastly, this is one that usually gets forgotten about until something really bad happens, and this is the disposition or retirement of devices. How many of us have heard the stories of people who have gone out to eBay and bought a medical device only to find out that it has a certain healthcare system's data still on it? That is something that needs to be addressed, and you can address it using the tool and the service. The tool will tell you, hey, I haven't seen this device in a certain number of days. You don't have to rely on your could not locate process. Today, if it's a device that only gets PM'd once or twice a year, you only have 2 shots to look for that device. If you didn't see it the first time, somebody's going to note it and say, I couldn't find it. The second time when they couldn't find it again, maybe they're going to do an incident and dig in to find out where that device is. But this tool allows you to do that immediately. You can set that threshold. I wouldn't say do it in 7 days because a lot of this devices are transient, but you might say, if I don't see this device in 14 days, I need to tell somebody. I need to have them go look for it. The reason you want to do that is you don't want that to be your device that just walked out the door. We all have a lot of vendor contracts, and we all have a lot of people in and out of our health systems every day. Someone comes in and says, hey, I'm here to look at this device. I'm from IT. Are they going to question them if the person has a badge on? Probably not. And that person probably has a contractor badge because they're in and out of your organizations all the time. Now, whether they mean to do it or not, they're trying to work on the device. They finally get to a point where they say, I can't fix it. I'm just going to replace it. That device walks out of your site. Did anybody see it? Do you have any documentation that holds that vendor responsible for where did that device go? Probably not, and we're going to help you figure out that process. Shankar is going to talk a little bit about his tool, his awesome tool, and then we'll talk a little bit about how that feeds back into our processes. Shankar?
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. And like Carrie mentioned, I think the right solution is really a combination of a tool or a solution and a service that Synergistic brings to the customer. And this first piece around procurement management really illustrates that. So really what we're talking about here from an assembly perspective is assembly has this solution that allows you to assess the risk of any device that you are planning to procure. So this is pre-purchase. Before you have brought it into the network, you will want to understand the risk of the device you're buying. You want to understand, you want to analyze those risks. You want to understand, what kind of recommendations or mitigations you can apply right at deployment instead of waiting to deploy the device and then figuring out what to do. You want to know how you want to configure the device. So you want to pull all the data about the device, and then you want to understand what is the best way to configure the device on your network. And then you want to generate a neatly formatted report that you can then take to your governance committee or take to your people internally on the procurement cyber risk at procurement decision. So you understand what you're getting into and can manage it. And then Carrie will talk now about how Synergistic can use the data to provide a complete cycle as well. Carrie?
So now you have this great big report and you know all of the devices on your network and you know all of the risks that's sitting on your network. What are you going to do with that? Well, Synergistic is going to help you take that data and build a plan for it. We're going to build a remediation strategy. We're going to make sure that strategy is contextually right for your organization. Go through and make sure that if it's a critical, it's really a critical. It could show up as a critical because of the number of devices, but maybe that's not where you're going in your organization. So take that plan, make it make sense for your organization, and then help you operationalize it. Where do we need to start? How does that need to happen? What are the pieces that need to fall into place to get your organization to a lower state of risk? Then we need to keep taking a look at what are the controls that are in place to make sure that this program is still flowing right and we're still going in the right direction to remediate all of that information. And all of those devices change. You could have a project that's changing a whole group of devices. We need to keep track of where that happened and adjust the remediation strategy accordingly. And then really take all of that and help offer some guidance in where should the program go. We're getting a lot of great information out of the tool. How can we keep using that, keep growing that, and make sure that we're giving you the best guidance we can to help you lower the risk for your organization? Back to you, Shankar.
Thank you, Carrie. So let's go over some of the other elements that you need as part of the program. So the first one is really around inventory management. And really, Assembly and Synergistic work together to provide you that complete inventory that you need, which becomes the basic step on which everything else is built. And you need information under several different aspects to ensure you get the right inventory. You need to know first, obviously, the number of network connected medical devices that you have. You want to know different parameters about the device. These could be, medical device parameters like manufacturer, device type, model, serial number, firmware version, IT parameters like IP, MAC, port protocol, services, operating system, or cybersecurity capabilities of the device. And you want to get all of them together in one single view. You want to know, how these devices are connected to the network, where is the data flowing, where they are reaching out, who's reaching out to them. You want to know which ones are transmitting EPHI, which ones are potentially storing EPHI. And storing EPHI also becomes an important point when you are looking to finally decommission the device. And you also want to know how your vendors are accessing these devices. When are they accessing the devices? What are they doing when they access the device? What service are they using? You want to get that comprehensive view. And that comprehensive view then becomes the base for everything else you do. And, the thing with network, all these solutions, and Assembly really has spent a lot of effort and has great accuracy with this, but it's still a passive solution. And so Synergistic is able to take the data and further refine it using their knowledge, using their experience, and correlate it with the other data sources. It could include CMMS, which Assembly can integrate with, and then Synergistic can look through the data and do some cleaning of the data if required, and to make sure that you have the best possible source of truth. Because you might have entered something in the CMMS and Assembly finds something, and they could be conflicting, and Assembly is obviously finding it on the network. Could it be a topology? Could it be a naming convention? Could it be something else? Synergistic can do a quick check, a verification, and make sure that the data is complete and it is the source of truth here. So the next piece is really, once you have the inventory, you really want to manage the vulnerability. And together as a combination, we are able to help the customers. But the key thing with medical devices is, every medical device has a vulnerability. Microsoft, Linux, all the RTOS vendors, if you put them together, they probably publish a few hundred vulnerabilities a month, probably between 500 to 1,000 vulnerabilities. A manufacturer publishes maybe 1 or 2 patches a month, right? So you can buy a device yesterday, and in a month, you already have, an unpatched device in your environment. So the question is then, how do you prioritize what you need to focus on? Because you can't go after your entire inventory. It's just, you're never going to have the resources. And the good part is not all devices have the same risk. And you'll find that even across devices with the same operating system, the same model, the same manufacturer, the same software version, the risk could be different. And why is that the case? Because unlike IT devices, in medical devices, there are a lot of factors that really affect the risk of the medical device. One is the exploitability of the vulnerability. So is the vulnerability exploitable in that environment? And Assembly does a lot of work in this area where we go and research on the vulnerabilities, figure out how it can be exploited, and we match it, and the solution automatically matches it to the device in the environment to see if it's exploitable. You need to see the impact of the vulnerability. Not every vulnerability has the same impact. The impacts on patient data business could be different. You need to see how the device is connected. Is it behind a secure gateway? Is it behind something? You need to understand the security capabilities of the device. Maybe there are security capabilities that mitigate the risk of the device. Those could come from MDS2, those could come from the network, and maybe there are other mitigating security controls that you have applied. And all of these and many more have to be taken into account before you understand whether the vulnerability is exploitable in your environment, whether it's high impact. And then if it's highly exploitable and it's high impact, then Assembly will provide some workarounds that can be implemented. And then Synergistic, where Synergistic comes in, is it takes all this data and it takes all this information, it takes the priority, it takes the workaround, and it uses its experience of medical devices to help the health system focus on the critical few that Assembly recommends, but also guide the health system on implementing the workaround, because Synergistic can validate or verify these workarounds and make sure that implementing them will not harm the medical device. Now, Assembly takes care to do that, but Synergistic can provide that expertise and that voice of reason, that voice of knowledge, and confirm that these workarounds are harmless to implement, and they effectively provide a good path forward for the health environment to mitigate the risk while ensuring that they can still continue to use the medical device, even though it could be, having some vulnerabilities that could be unpatched. The next piece is intrusion detection, along with understanding the root cause. So this is something where you got to understand what's currently happening in your environment. So vulnerability is, these are CVEs and things like that, which, everyone publishes. Intrusion detection or anomaly detection or security attack detection, however people call it, is really what's happening in your environment today. And some examples are our devices dialing out, unexpected domains or even malicious domains or IPs. Are they being scanned? You generally don't want your medical devices to be scanned. So are your medical devices being scanned from unexpected sources, or even from internal scanners, which you probably don't want? Or are the default username passwords being used, which you probably don't want because that opens up a line of attack? And then along with that, understanding the root cause. So like say you have a scan that's happening or, devices dialing out externally. Why did that happen? Like, what is the root cause here? Requires time and resources to solve the problem. Understanding the root cause really saves on those time and resources and helps you focus. And, this is obviously a continuous monitoring solution. It's continuously picking this up, prioritizing, providing the root cause. And so Synergistic provides that expertise and people who can monitor the data from Assembly to flag the ones which are the most critical, to look at the, root cause analysis that Assembly provides, and to really understand what is it that they need to focus on, what the health system needs to focus on, and, which ones you really need to act on. And then the last piece in this puzzle is really around containment and micro-segmentation and setting the right policies once you have done the vulnerability analysis, once you have the workarounds, once you have the anomaly detection, the intrusion detection. Setting the right policies ensures that the network is protected. And such policies can be either containment, where you just, block certain devices which you think could pose a great harm, or block specific ports on the device. That could be, the exploit vector path, as assembly shows from the vulnerability exploit analysis. So those could be blocking or containment policies, which those should not probably cause any operational issues, and that's why Synergistic will verify that. But the workarounds will not cause any operational issues, and that's the containment policy. But you can also have segmentation policies where you say, okay, I have done all these containment, but now I realize that, I have all these risks that Synergistic and Assembly are providing, and I want to make maybe a risk-based segmentation where I want to segment out those devices which potentially pose the highest risk. And they might not all be your legacy operating systems. Some of them could be new. Some of them could be legacy, like I said. So understanding how to do a risk-based segmentation, you take that information, Assembly and Synergistic provide, and you can segment it out. And you, at the same time, when you do all of this segmentation, you want to make sure that you don't over-segment. Segmentation has also got has its own challenges when you over-segment, and that could become an overhead by itself. And so you got to take care of, avoiding over-segmentation. And then Synergistic uses all this data Assembly provides, the capability that Assembly provides to be able to block a segment from its solution, and then provides the appropriate level of segmentation guidance that you can implement. It's like I said, you don't want to over-segment, you don't want to under-segment. You have all the data, you have the capabilities, but you want to do the right level, and that's what Synergistic brings here. And this is back to you, Carrie, to talk about the managed service pieces.
Thanks, Shankar. So now that we've talked to you a little bit about what the tool can do and what the processes from Synergistic are, let's take a look with a more critical eye for what are the exact elements that you're going to get if you pair the two. You know that you're going to get asset discovery. We've talked about that. We've talked about the ability to specifically characterize those medical devices as medical devices. Threat identification. What's out there? What vulnerabilities do you have? What do you have today that you didn't have yesterday? Taking a look and analyzing those vulnerabilities. What can we do with that? How do we work around that? What is the way to get that vulnerability remediated? Then let's take a look at what's the likelihood that that's going to recur, or that we have that in another place in the network so that we can make sure we're monitoring the entire thing. What's the impact from that? Where are all the devices that are going to be impacted by that vulnerability? The Assembly tool will allow you to sort by that vulnerability, and you can see clearly visually what the impact is to your organization from that specific vulnerability. And then really, what's the level of risk that's coming into your organization based on all the information that you just found from the tool? Once you've got all that info from the tool, what are you going to do with it? You need to make sure that you're analyzing it continuously. You're making sure you're keeping your documentation up. You're keeping your remediation on track. You've got a plan. And then does your remediation fit into your overall risk management strategy? Where is it that you are trying to remediate first? What are you trying to close up? What are the gaps that you've got that will help you turn a remediation plan into a risk management strategy? And then really, let's talk about what are the benefits for doing that. Using CTEC and Assembly together really allow you to do an end-to-end life cycle management process. And we integrate NIST into your framework, making sure that we are balancing that against all of the families of risk. And where does that come out? Where do we focus our attention? What is it we need to pay the most attention to first? Procurement. We've talked about this a couple times in this presentation, but really understanding what do you have, what are you bringing on, and what's leaving your organization, and do you know what the entire life cycle is for that device? Creation of those baselines that I talked about earlier, making sure that you have a baseline for every device that's going to come into your network. You know that you have 6 ultrasounds, you're going to replace 2 next year. What is that baseline that needs to be there before those devices walk in the door? And once that device walked in the door and got connected,
Does it meet the baseline that you set? That's very important. To have the assembly tool be able to say, this doesn't match what you said it was supposed to be set up like. It's just like immediate response to, oops, I made a mistake. I missed turning off one port, or I missed setting a setting in the network section of the device. So that's awesome to be able to see that. Then being able to operationalize your security program. We tend to think of IT security in one bucket and biomed security in another, but they're truly not. They are both sitting on your network, and they both have different issues that you need to deal with. But once you've got the tool in place and you've got the processes in place, you can start to look at it as your network instead of my IT network and my biomed network. It just changes the focus, and it changes the way the two groups work together, which is what you really need to be successful. Then you're going to keep going with your threat and vulnerability analysis. You've got the tool in place. Now we've helped you get the processes in place to manage that. So it's a continuous program. And then really taking a look at your training and awareness. You've done all this work to get the information you need, build a program on top of it that helps you manage all that information. Now you need to tell people about it. They need to have training. They need to understand why it's not okay to leave a mobile x-ray machine logged in the hallway. It's no different than if they left their workstation logged in at their desk. Those need to be trained. They need to be brought out. That awareness doesn't exist today. And between the two of us, we can definitely help you get that out there and get that normalized back into your organizational society. Thank you so much for spending time with the three of us today. We enjoyed talking to you about medical device security. As you can tell in all three of our voices, it's pretty much a passion of ours, and we live and breathe this every day. We would be happy to answer any questions that you might have as a follow-up for this presentation. Please feel free to reach out to any of the three of us, and we will take care of any questions that you have. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, team. A quick reminder for our attendees today. To obtain your certificate for 1 CE credit from the ACI, please remember to click the link located below this webinar title to complete today's survey. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinars@mdpublishing.com.